Welcome back everyone. So we're going to start a new year with an interesting box design. I'm making this box from 12mm birch ply. So we're going to start by ripping that up and cutting it to length. Then we are going to head over to the rouse table, and with an end mill there, we are going to take a 6x6mm square off the edge of each piece, and that will allow them to slot together to form the basis of our box. So I'm using 12mm birch ply here. This is BB grade, so it has no voids. I'm using birch ply because the end grain of the plywood is going to be on show on the final bit of this box, and I want nice clean layers. Here we're using a 12.5mm bit to put some grooves into the ends of each of these pieces, and that is to accept the end plate. Now I'm marking the base up, I'm going to route up that area to accept a latch. I'm using the offcuts of birch ply here to make a routing jig, and then I'm going to use a top following router bit to recess that area, marked with a pencil there. That's going to accept our latch. There's a little bit of breakout on the base, but as you'll see in a bit, that won't matter. Now we are going to move on to the drawer. I've milled up some 12mm thick ash, and I'm going to use my marking gauge here to mark out some dovetails. I'm cutting these dovetails tails first, and once I've marked it all out, we're then going to go in with the saw and cut along our lines. There are a couple of ways of doing dovetails. Personally, this is my favourite. You lay it all out, and we're going to use our saw and cut straight on the knife mark. No going back with chisels for cleanup on those faces. I'm then going to use my coping saw to take out the waste. Then going to go in with some very fine chisels just to clean up the very bottom of the cut. Unfortunately, you can't get a good enough finish of a coping saw. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut the whole set. Once I've got my tails, I'm then going to use my tails to mark out my pins. These are matched sets, so the joints I'm cutting out, those sides are going to go back together, so I've marked them up. This is number one. I've put one on both sides. So that set of tails will always go into this set of pins. And these are also done off the saw, so I'm cutting straight down the line, keeping the saw perfectly perpendicular, then removing the waste of the coping saw and chiselling out the bottom flat to my gauge line. The other methods for doing this would be to saw away from your mark and chisel to it on all of the faces. That's really time consuming, and I find that tricky. I think if you can get a good enough finish off a sharp saw, then you save a whole load of time. Back over to the router table now. This is a 6.3mm router bit, and I'm going to groove out the base of each bit. The end pieces I can do a full groove, and the side bits here you need to drop onto the router bit and lift it out before. That's to prevent the groove from being seen on the end of the box. So now what we need is a drawer base. This is oak veneered birch ply. I had a small offcut, so we're going to use that. After a few goes at fitting each joint, they end up sliding together quite well. And now we're going to glue it. Some wood glue in here. You notice on the long side I just put a dot of wood glue, and that's just to hold the base and stop it from rattling around. And then just wipe all the excess glue. I'm going to wait for the glue to kick off a bit, and then I come back and do the clean up as it's gelling up, and that way it's easier to scrape off. So now we're going to move on to the latch. This is a thin bit of ash, and I'm going to essentially try and make a spring. We're now going to make the slope. This slope is what the drawer is going to eventually ride over, and the flat face on the other side of the slope is what will latch it in place. So here is the finished drawer. So now I'm just testing it with the spring. You can maybe guess what we're going for here now. Now I'm going to fit the spring. This is going to spring the drawer out. So now I'm going to move on to the spring part of the sprung loaded drawer. I bought an assortment of springs, and I've picked one out that I like, that feels about right. Now you can see what that extra bit of wood I've stuck onto the latch is for. It raises it up and allows it to drop down. So in fitting the latch, in it flexing down, it runs into the bottom of the box here. So we're now going to have to remove that section as well. And all this does is give it a bit more clearance to flex down as the box rides over. Then we're going to glue the latch in place. So with latch drying, I'm now going to move on to the guide block. This block will hold the pin that will come into contact with the latch and push it down. So here I'm drilling a 6.5mm hole, and that is going to accept the brass rod, which is 6mm. This is the brass pin. In order to keep it placed, I'm peeling over the end and flaring it out. That's going to hold it in the guide block and stop it escaping. And now, just remembering to put that pin in, we're going to glue it up. And here you can see pushing on the pin pushes the latch down and operates the mechanism. With the main body of the Matchbox glued up, we're now going to move on to the veneer. So for this, I'm going to use this dyed tulip wood veneer, and I'm going to try and recreate the Swan Vestas logo in wood veneer. And for that, I've sat down at the computer, come up with a design, and now all that's left is to cut all the pieces and see if it works. So there we go, all the bits fit together. We have our logo, so now we're going to glue it down. I'm just using regular wood glue for this, making sure to have plenty of it, because the last thing you want is any veneer lifting. To glue these down, I have made these two boards here out of MDF. One of them has a hole drilled in it to allow the pin to pass through, and that means I can glue both sides up at once using clamps to give even pressure. Just makes the whole process a bit quicker. Using a bit of acetone there in the spray bottle just to help lift the tape. And after cleaning up the excess, we're then going to go on to attaching the top and bottom. And that's all the veneer glued on now. Trim off any overhanging bits of veneer, and then we're going to move on to sanding. With these coloured veneers, it's very important that you don't get bleed through, because if you're sanding red next to white and white next to black especially, you might get bleed through of the dust and dye in the different colours seeping into the next one. So what I'm doing here is I'm using mesh pads and I'm using a leaf blower to blow any fine dust away before it can get worked back into the grain. With that done, we're going to go into spray booth. This is a water-based clear lacquer. It brings out the colours in the veneer really nicely, and it's quite a durable, fast-drying finish, so I can get lots of coats on. I think in total I put about 6 coats on the box and drawer together. And then we're just tidying up the last bits. This is striker paper. I'm putting it on the back side of the box because when you strike a match, little bits of phosphorus come off. I think it's phosphorus. And I didn't want that landing onto finished veneer because that would burn the finish. So I've put it on the back side so it falls straight down and doesn't land in the box. Now I'm cleaning up the brass pin, so I've taped off the veneer. I'm going at it with some Scotch-Brite. This didn't come up quite as I wanted it to, but I'm hoping that once the brass is tarnished up, it will look a bit better. And with the spring in, we are basically ready. I'm just going to wax up the inside of the box. And I also waxed up the outside of the drawer, and that's to help it run nicely. Last thing to do, I'm going to stick my logo on, load up the box with matches, and it's finished. Now we can see the spring mechanism. And the match striker. I was so pleased with this. I actually made 2. These are Christmas presents for close family and friends. And with that, thanks for watching. Hope everyone has a great new year, and I'll see you in the next one.